My name is Julia, and I'm a designer. Thanks everybody for being here and listening to us talk about sex and sex tech. I'm going to go over really quickly about our workshop and what I do and what I did and what we're going to be doing. This workshop, I'll get to what that picture means in a little bit in the next couple slides. But this workshop started in Brazil. It was a collaboration when I was living there for a year with a really brilliant Brazilian designer called Esther. This is all her contact and everything you need to know. And she's been doing research about sex and disability, and she's been looking at ways that people with disabilities can feel pleasure that might not be on the mainstream market. And she developed a toy for the ear, and basically it would send vibration to the ear, and then you were supposed to sort of feel pleasure from that. And it was kind of exploring alternative points of pleasure, which was a really signifying point in the future of our work together. Absolutely check her out on her website and on her Instagram as well. There's everything you need to know more about that project. I'm obviously not going to be talking about that. So then when I went to Brazil, we collaborated together on this workshop. We decided that we wanted to kind of know a bit more about what people were thinking about this. And so the whole idea was to rethink our pleasure, basing ourselves from the research of Esther, rethink where our pleasure could potentially be coming from. So the idea of the workshop, the way we kind of designed it was to design a little bit, rethink about where we could be feeling our pleasure from, 3D print it, which we fortunately enough had access to a 3D printer at that time, and then add a little bit of soldering, a little bit of tech to it, which was a really, really nice way of doing it. So at the bottom here, that was a really abstract example that was 3D printed. And then you could add sensors to it, which was a little vibrator, the sort of thing that you get from your phone, which again was a conversation about reusing tech in different ways, and reusing older objects that you could, and repurposing them. So the idea was to put this tiny vibrator, add it to a switch, which you've got down there, and kind of hook everything up to this toy that you've designed that is supposed to be completely upper body. And the whole idea was to kind of rethink about the conversation around pleasure and absolutely not focus on genitals, which is something that we're so prone to. Once we think of pleasure, we think of, as you were saying, penetration, and we were thinking in really heteronormative ways. So this was sort of a workshop to rethink about where your pleasure could come from, whether it's your ear, whether it's your chin, whether it's your elbow, whether obviously your nipple, and different parts of the body that might be a stimulus to you. So it was a really workshop that sort of crammed a lot of tech into it. It was over a day and it was really intense. And we kind of, we were just two young designers and just worked with about 10 women, just saying, right, think of your body in a really abstract way, in something that you've never ever done before. And then let's make something and let's design something for that. Troopers, they did really, really well, and they were thinking of really sort of abstract and also comical solutions to the possible designs. In the end, it was really interesting to spend time with these women. The tech was great and it was really interesting, and it was also really fun talking about sex and all this stuff. But it's really, the most important part was the morning side of it, which was talking about pleasure as women, and especially sharing our experiences as women and what we've experienced in pleasure and in sex with our partners on a solo basis and all of that. And I think, personally for me, that was the most rewarding part of the workshop, was being able to share all of these experiences that actually in the end we're all feeling the same thing, and we're all actually really similar in our experiences, which is something that you might not be thinking of in the beginning. So that was ran over a day, and then on my return to London, I decided to redo it in London through Makerversity when I was doing a residency over there, which is in partnership with Somerset House. So that was ran in July. And the idea was pretty much, the basis was the conversation was the same. I really wanted to hear other women talk about their own experiences, but also share my own experiences. And that was the basis of it. So what we did down here were two speakers. I got two speakers to speak. There's their contacts that you can look at afterwards. Vibio is a non-intrusive vibrator. They're on Kickstarter at the moment, and they're starting their startup, and they're really interesting to have a look at. Two young girls, two Spanish girls that are building their startup from that. And so they came and sort of talked about sex tech on a bit more of a techie side. And then controversial design, down there, they're writing a book about controversial design, which includes sex, food, and death. So this was a talk that we ran. The context of that burning the dildo was that this actually, funnily enough, this dildo was the conversation piece of pretty much all the workshops that we ran. This was pretty much the starter, saying that this was one of my first sex toys that I bought when I was 18 or something like that, 18, 19, thinking that this was what pleasure would be and thinking that this is what my body would wanted. I've never used it because it looks, as you can see, really intrusive, really pink, really veiny, really big. And at the time, I just had such a disconnect with this object. Even from a design perspective, I just looked at this object and I was like, how can someone make this and mass manufacture it? And you think that this is what your body wants. So anyway, it kind of sat on my nightstand or whatever for years and years and years until it came to these workshops. I was like, fuck yeah, I can actually talk about this from a design perspective and actually show that this is the exact opposite of what, you know, women, or me personally anyway, would want from sex toys and from pleasure. So that's pretty much what I was talking about there. These little ones are Vibio's prototypes, which, as you can see, are really small and really discreet. And at the bottom picture, that was us testing the material of the dildo, which is really important in the sex toy industry, which, you know, mass manufactured toys are actually really bad materials, really bad for your health, really bad for what you're putting inside you. So this test was, if you burn it and it obviously bubbles up or changes in any way, that shows that it's a really toxic material. And if you try this with a lot of different, which I won't name any companies, but if you try these with mass manufactured toys, you'll see that it will do that. Thankfully this one didn't. Yay, Ann Summers. Yeah, so that's a few pictures from the actual workshop. It was really intimate, really nice, working with women and one guy who was the only guy, but, you know, shared his experience really openly, and it was such a pleasure to have him there. The difference from the workshop that we did in Brazil was that it was clay. We were working with clay as opposed to 3D printing and, you know, soldering and using vibrations and all of this stuff. And I decided to use clay because it's a really versatile material. It's a really nice material to use. You can change it in matters of seconds. You can design what you want and then change it and over again. So this was a really nice material. I just sort of gave them kilos of clay and then let the participant, and I did it as well, build whatever they thought was current for them. And the brief was really just think about a part of your body, choose a part of your body, and how would you design for that if you had to receive pleasure in that part of the body, and which part of the body would you choose, or that you would want incorporated in the bedroom, or not even, in solo play or partner play. So that was pretty much it. And then we ran that lasted a day. And again, really, I wish I could have brought stuff to show you, but it wasn't, still in the kiln. But we had some really nice results, really abstract as well, and it's really difficult to ask someone to think really abstractly about their body and to think about where their pleasure could come from when you're given so many, preconceived notions of what sex toys is, which are just dildos or intrusive toys. So it's really difficult to ask someone, okay, think completely, destroy everything that you know from your pleasure and rethink where it could be coming from. So as you can see, kind of really abstract objects came up, which I think are really nice. Some that fit in the hand, which are either used for stimulation or stimulate your hand. Some semi-intrusive, and then some more gentle toys down there. So that was, those were the 2 workshops that we ran, and I think that's about it. That's all I really wanted to say, was to show you the work that we've been doing that came from Esther's project back in Brazil, and then what we brought to London to kind of work with you guys a little bit, and I think that's not much more that I wanted to say. I think that's I just wanted to show the work that we were doing. I think that's pretty much it. Thank you. Thanks for listening.
Hi, were there any sort of non-genital parts of the body that people kind of came to a consensus on? Were there certain areas of the body that people kept going back to that was sort of surprising that people chose?
I think because you're so taught that your body, that your pleasure either comes from, your genitals, and then maybe some start thinking, oh, your nipples are actually a really nice part of the body, even though that is still quite standard, But, when they start working with the neck and with the ears, these are all parts of the body that are really interesting to work with, and these are things that we sort of pushed. And then the one in Brazil, I felt that it was a bit more explorative, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, where they were thinking of the chin, which are parts of the bodies that you wouldn't necessarily be thinking of. But again, the whole point is that your pleasure is yours, and it doesn't belong to a central body. It doesn't belong to what someone says it should be. So if someone gets pleasure from their elbow, who am I to kind of interfere with that? And it was sort of creating that space for letting them explore that a little bit. And we had a section where it was working with different materials, feeling on the body, parts that would actually be, quite triggering in the positive way. And they sort of feed off that and then work into their own design. Work from their own design in that. So, it's funny, a lot of people did in the beginning feel maybe a bit constrained and work with the most typical parts of the body that are not genitals, which are the nipples and maybe the ear. But then eventually when you start getting a bit comfortable and a bit abstract in your way of doing things, then you end up, working with really random parts of the body that you wouldn't necessarily think of, I think.
Just wanted to ask if you were working on any designs of your own based on these workshops, or if it's kind of inspired you in any way in your work.
It definitely did at some point. I think it'd feel a bit funny doing this work without Esther, who, a lot of this work is based from her research. So I think it'd be a bit, personally, it wouldn't be the route that I take down working with her. I think there's so much potential, and I really hope to see from sex tech, more work like this that maybe doesn't focus on penetrative toys or doesn't focus on intrusive toys, and focuses in sort of non-binary relationships, especially. I think it's really important to think of pleasure in that way. But personally, I think it would have to be a collaboration with Esther again to kind of finalize it, rather than, because I think you can go down the route of being a sex toy designer, but I'm not too sure if that's the route to go right now.
Did you get any insights in how people use? It looked like you were looking very much at shapes rather than what we heard before, more about the behaviors. But did you gain any insights in? Typically, the phallic object has a certain affordance to put it into something. If you start looking at nipples, cheeks, nose, ear, did you see anything coming out of that there's some kind of a semantic language or anything that people were looking in, that you could read the object?
I mean, again, sort of similar to the first question, I think, your immediate thought is to go to what you know, which is phallic objects, and to go to what you've sort of grown up with or been taught. But, I think then it starts to take, throughout the workshop, it starts to take different formats, which is maybe more of a softer shapes. Personally for me, these phallic toys can be really aggressive to the eye and can be really like off-putting simply by its design, simply by the shape of what they look like and what they represent. And I think throughout time and conversation, you do seem to, you find much softer shapes that cover a part of the body as opposed to insert in a part of the body, if that makes sense. And I think, once you start kind of taking away from what you know and start thinking in this way, you start thinking of parts of the body that you could cover. And the whole idea is non-intrusion. And this is something really important to deconstruct, personally, I think, is to stop putting things in and start taking it out, and start, taking time with your body and thinking about places in your body that you don't need any kind of sort of penetration or any kind of that sort of aspect on it. So I would say much softer shapes, much softer designs is what I've seen from these workshops, personally.
There was this exhibition at Barbican about famous couples or partnerships in art. And it was less about the art, but more about the conversation, relationships they had. And there was a piece, I think, by Marcel Duchamp, which I didn't know, but he created the negative spaces of his partners. It was a beautiful piece because you didn't recognize any shape of a body because it was the negative space, but it was from all parts of the body. It was beautiful, absolutely gorgeous. All right, nice to think about.
Thank you so much, Julia. Let's give her another big round of
Thank
applause.
you.